This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. The huge hurricane called Felix is headed towards somewhere along the east coast of the United States tonight and could make landfall in less than 24 hours. Hurricane watches and warnings are up all along the mid-Atlantic coast from South Carolina to Delaware. Others along the coast are advised to monitor the hurricane. If this unusually large hurricane does hit land, the most likely target at the moment is between Wilmington and Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Right now, the eye of the hurricane is still about 300 miles off the Carolina coast, but this storm has a very long reach. Hurricane and tropical storm force winds reach out nearly 300 miles from the center of Felix. And while the sun was shining along the eastern seaboard today, the waters were violent, all the way up to New England. Powerful waves and riptides are now blamed for at least 3 deaths. Beaches are off limits to bathers as far north as Maine.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand. They just, think we're being overcautious, but, in reality, we're probably saving their life.
Thousands evacuated coastal areas of North Carolina. Even the Navy retreated. As the hurricane moved in, ships based in Norfolk, Virginia moved out to ride out the storm at sea. Bermuda was spared a direct hit by the center of Felix, but there was enough damage to force postponement of Bermuda's referendum on independence until tomorrow. Clearly understand that at the moment, this hurricane is expected to hit somewhere on the mainland United States. If it doesn't slow down, that could happen probably sometime late tomorrow. If it does slow down, the hurricane could grow in intensity. It will bear watching. With North Carolina the most likely landfall target, at least for now, people along that coast are packing up and moving out of the way, especially fearing rising water. As correspondent Art Rascone reports, Carolinians have been through this before.
It's a solid building. Boarding up once again. It's the third time in 2 years a hurricane has hit the Outer Banks of North Carolina.
Something you live with. Just part of the job when you live on the Outer Banks.
Time to tie down and hold on to businesses, homes, and a way of life.
You just never know what the storm is going to do. That's the nerve-wracking part, that you just don't know.
Andy McCann does know what hurricanes can do. He's fought the best of them on the Outer Banks. 2 years ago, he watched Hurricane Emily batter his beloved fishing pier. He has seen neighbors' houses fall into the ocean. For residents here, it's something you fear, but live with.
Well, you just got 1 or 2 bad days out of the year, and the rest of them beautiful. It's like living in paradise the rest of the year.
If Hurricane Felix continues on...
The Outer Banks are under mandatory evacuation orders. Traffic is backed up for miles along the coast. Everyone heading north.
The storm might be coming this way.
But 80-year-old Rachel Austin isn't going anywhere. She's lived through a dozen powerful hurricanes, and she'll see this one through.
You're not going to leave.
No, I'm not going to leave.
Why?
Well, I never have left.
The winds are picking up, and the storm is so wide that hurricane-force winds will likely hit this coast by tomorrow morning, and tomorrow evening make landfall. Art Rascone, CBS News, Nags Head, North Carolina.
The hurricane watch includes the fact that hurricanes are very unpredictable. This is why our old friend Dr. Neil Frank in Houston, our hurricane consultant, and others are emphasizing that while at the moment it looks like the hurricane will go in sometime tomorrow in some part of the Carolinas, that it does bear watching very closely. Now, this was one of the most emotional and possibly important days at the O.J. Simpson murder trial. At times, the case appeared headed for a mistrial as lawyers battled over the Furman tapes. The prosecution accused the defense of, and I quote, playing the race card to divert the jury's attention from the evidence against Simpson. And Judge Lance Ito's wife became an issue. In the end, correspondent Bill Whitaker reports the judge was forced to make a painful decision.
All right, Judge Lance Ito was the first fallout of those incendiary Mark Furman tapes, today choking up as he removed himself from deciding whether the tapes should be introduced in court. The reason? Because of disparaging remarks Furman makes on the tapes about Ito's wife, LAPD Captain Peggy York.
I will love my wife dearly. I am wounded by criticism of her. And I think it is reasonable to assume that could have some impact.
CBS News has learned that on the tapes, Furman criticizes York's weight, her appearance, what he considered her lack of qualifications, and he brags about refusing to cooperate with York when she investigated him for alleged misconduct 10 years ago. Judge Ito decided to let another judge rule on the tapes to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. If all that weren't enough, transcripts of a meeting in Judge Ito's chambers yesterday reveal even more incendiary comments from the Furman tapes. Defense attorney Johnny Cochran said the tapes show that Furman, quote, doesn't like blacks or Mexicans or Jews. He hates women. He hates everybody, basically, except white Anglo-Saxon men who are police officers. Cochran quotes Furman as saying, quote, you see a nigger in a Porsche and he doesn't have a $100 suit on, then you stop him because he has probably stolen the car. Furman, according to Cochran, says police once beat people until their faces turn to mush. There's so much blood on their uniform they have to spray themselves down with hoses. He says that Furman talks of tearing up driver's licenses, of how to do chokeholds, of how to beat confessions out of people, and how to shoot, not to stop, but to kill.
This is a blockbuster. This is a bombshell. This is perhaps the biggest thing that's happened in any case in this country in this decade.
What we vouch for, in terms of Detective Furman, in terms of everyone in this case, is that no one planted any evidence at any time. And now that the evidence has come out conclusively, irrefutably, and consistently that there was no opportunity to plant a glove, they are just going all out to smear Mark Furman.
Furman first rocked this case when he reported finding one of those bloody gloves. Now his shocking tapes threaten to rock this trial right off its foundation. And that's something even battling defense attorneys and prosecutors agree they don't want to see happen. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Let's turn now to our CBS News legal consultant, Laurie Levinson. Laurie, did the judge make the right call?
I think Judge Ito did exactly the right thing for exactly the right reasons. Even if Judge Ito thought that he could be fair to both sides on this issue, just the appearance of partiality made it a tough call, and he sent it to another judge to decide whether his wife's involvement really makes sense in this case.
What are the chances, if any, for a mistrial? Start the case all over?
I don't think we're looking at a mistrial, at least not now, because if Judge Ito cannot complete this case, they'll bring in another judge who can. We're not at that point. The only point where we might have a mistrial is if the jurors who are waiting around for all of this to be resolved get antsy and then they leave the jury.
Among decisions ahead, whether to actually allow the tapes into evidence, allow the jury to hear them. What's that decision likely to be?
We don't know yet. It's very tough. This new judge not only has to listen to 12 hours of these tapes, but get up to the point where he understands the context in which they were said. And that may take a week or 2 weeks for the new judge to review all the tapes and transcripts of this trial.
Laurie Levinson in Los Angeles, thanks. Still ahead, 50 years after the fact, Japan's closest thing yet to a World War II apology. And Eye on America, the little radio station that could, until the government tuned in. Bombing case, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols arrived at the U.S. courthouse at a caravan of police and U.S. Marshals' vehicles. Both pleaded not guilty. Outside court, Terry Nichols' brother, James, who has not been charged in the case, insisted his brother is innocent as well.
We don't run around destroying people and destroying buildings. We do our fighting in court.
Attorneys for Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh complained today that their clients cannot get a fair trial in the Oklahoma City courthouse, which is right across the street from the bomb site. Private militia groups and other critics of federal law enforcement are welcoming today's news in another high-profile case. The Justice Department says it has agreed to pay more than $3 million to a white separatist, Randy Weaver, and his family. That settlement stems from the killing of Weaver's wife and a son during a confrontation with federal agents in Idaho 3 years ago. The U.S. Defense Department is imposing more administrative punishments against officers involved in the friendly fire disaster over Iraq last year. No one has been convicted or sentenced, but the Air Force said today it was, quote, holding all involved accountable. Correspondent Jim Stewart explains what that means.
A year and a half after Air Force jets accidentally shot down 2 Army helicopters over northern Iraq and killed 26 people, the Air Force announced today it will write critical letters to 7 officers involved, including 2 generals, but won't fire anyone.
We're talking about good officers. We're talking about people who have devoted their lives to the service of our nation. These are not people who are criminals in the ordinary sense of the word or in any sense of the word.
Family members of the victims, like Kay Munsey of Culver City, California, are outraged.
If you kill 26 people, even if it was an accident or negligence in your duty, they need to be eliminated from the military, not just a letter of reprimand, not just a slap on the hand.
Critics accuse the Air Force of going soft on senior officers.
We have a case here of negligent homicide. Now we're looking at, some bad mail in your officer selection jacket.
Besides the letter, the 2 F-15 pilots involved will be grounded for 3 years, as well as 3 officers aboard an airborne radar plane. The only Air Force officer criminally charged in the case was acquitted in June. Demanding justice, Kay Munsey has gone all the way to Congress with graphic pictures of her dead pilot husband.
And I think that picture put it back to home, saying, there were real victims here. There were 26 people killed. And I think they need to know and remember who the real victims were.
But identifying the victims in this case has always been easier than identifying the guilty, and today's actions would seem to underline that. No one will go to prison, no one will be fired, and no one in the military has yet to stand up and say, I'm responsible. Jim Stewart, CBS News at the Pentagon.
The first female cadet ever at the Citadel in South Carolina spent this day in the military school's infirmary. Shannon Faulkner was among 4 cadets overcome by yesterday's grueling first day of training in extreme heat. The U.S. Labor Department says some of this nation's top manufacturers and retailers may be selling clothing made in Los Angeles and Los Angeles area sweatshops by illegal immigrants working in slave conditions. 16 clothing makers have had their records subpoenaed, and the manufacturers may be liable for millions of dollars in back pay to the workers. Just ahead, 50 years after World War II ended, a Japanese leader finally utters the A word. The Prime Minister of Japan issued today what he called a, quote, heartfelt apology. He said the war was the result of Japan's, and again I quote, mistaken national policy. This is the clearest statement yet by any ranking Japanese official that Japan accepts responsibility for the war. But as our Tokyo correspondent James Hattori reports, it didn't close the book.
It was a day of solemn remembrance in Tokyo, honoring the souls of 3 million Japanese who died during World War II. At a ceremony attended by the Emperor, there was a silent prayer at 12 noon, the moment 50 years ago when Japan's previous Emperor, Hirohito, gave a radio address announcing his country's official surrender. The time has come, he said, for us to bear the unbearable.
There's no happiness.
Hisao Sawada was a 20-year-old kamikaze pilot training for the American invasion that never came. He says many Japanese had mixed feelings about ending the war.
I'm sure that they all felt we've had enough. But we're not too happy about the result.
The promises of victory were forgotten by the Japanese soon enough, but in neighboring Asian nations where millions were killed during Japan's vicious wartime campaign, there is no forgetting. In South Korea, where women were turned into wartime sex slaves, there was dancing in the streets today as workers began dismantling Japan's former colonial headquarters. In China, memorial exhibits depicting wartime atrocities, including the rape of Nanjing, during which Japanese soldiers slaughtered more than 100,000 civilians. Pan Kai-ming is a survivor. Burned houses were everywhere, he says. The fire kept burning for 6 weeks. In his strongest gesture yet, Prime Minister Tomichi Murayama, for the first time, apologized not only for the war, but for Japan's atrocities. Through its colonial rule and aggression, he says, Japan caused tremendous damage and suffering. 50 years later, the Japanese are remembering, perhaps more than they care to. James Hattori, CBS News, Tokyo.
A White House spokesman says President Clinton welcomes the Prime Minister's apology and looks forward to a future of friendship and cooperation with Japan. The President and First Lady took off from Washington today for a 2-week summer vacation in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Golf, hiking, and horseback riding will top the agenda. Next, a surprise ending to a true-life radio drama. So don't touch that dial. Also ahead, friends, family, and fans attend the last goodbye of Mickey Mantle.
Three, four.
Look around me, I can see my life before me, running rings around the way it used to be. Change my life, make it right, be my
isn't the only turbulence in the air tonight. On a whole different level, take the case of a little radio station in Missouri. It's gotten by with a little help from its friends. Then along came the government. Peter Van Sant tuned in for tonight's Eye on America.
And good morning. Welcome to another day of broadcasting right here at your unforgettable station, KTOZ 1060 AM.
KTOZ in Springfield, Missouri takes to the air each day at dawn with perhaps the most unlikely broadcast team in America.
Here's Kelly with that unforgettable weather forecast for today.
Today we've got mostly slight chance for showers, and I have no clue what the high is going to be.
Throughout the day, a team of DJs
There you go.
takes turns spinning old-time vinyl that no other station in town will touch.
A paper doll that I can call my own.
Like the Mills Brothers and Glenn Miller.
This is Polka Dots and Moonbeams.
All in a folksy, some would say hokey style.
This is Vaughn Monroe, my wife's favorite song, Ghost Riders in the Sky.
They don't sell many commercials at KTOZ AM, and the station is way in the red. Most of these albums were bought at garage sales. Egg cartons are used for soundproofing, and the equipment, station manager Ron Johnson will tell you, is as old as the music.
You can't even buy these tubes in the United States anymore.
My name's Jerry Clean. It's the DJs that give KTOZ AM its hometown flavor. When Jerry Clean isn't doing his no-look music selection,
You really pull him out like that?
I've always done that. He's stonewashing jeans at the Lee factory.
My name's John Adam.
John Adam
They wanted the dill spear on there.
works at a gourmet hot dog stand.
KTOZ, good morning.
Kenny Rogers
Back to that.
is a cashier at a gas station.
All right.
And smooth talker John Mayer is a mechanic.
How much do you pay?
Not one red cent.
Not a dime.
Zip, same as everybody else.
So these are all volunteers?
All of us, every one of us, including me, everyone. We do not have an employee.
KTOZ AM's volunteerism seemed admirable to nearly everyone, except the U.S. Labor Department. 3 months ago, an official came into this station and told the manager he was under investigation. The alleged crime, those volunteers.
They're saying a for-profit company cannot have volunteers.
That you have to pay the minimum wage.
Has to pay at least minimum wage.
But if KTOZ is forced to pay, it would be forced off the air. That disgusts DJ John Showman, who drives 200 miles round trip to volunteer.
If this continues, there'll be a bureaucrat in your bathroom making sure you brush your teeth. If I had to put it in 2 words, go away would be those 2 words.
The Labor Department in Missouri refused to talk to CBS News about its, quote, open investigation. But when we informed higher-ups in Washington that we were working on the story, the investigation was abruptly closed. We went back to Springfield to break the news.
Oh, really? I don't believe them. They just don't want the publicity. We're not going to let them off the hook.
And Ron Johnson says KTOZ will keep fighting until the government realizes that volunteers can be a good thing.
We're just 20 or 30 citizens that are fed up, and we decided to stand up and yell and fight for our rights.
It was a fight the volunteers won, but they still want to know why they were targeted by the government in the first place. In Springfield, Missouri, I'm Peter Van Sant for Eye on America.
Miss Cora and Miss Alice Munro to their father's command, Fort William Henry. The Indian, Magua, offered to show us a shorter route to the fort. We've been following him most of the day.
A shorter route? He's been leading you westward, away from the fort which lies to the north.
Westward?
But whatever for?
The daughters of one of the most important British military leaders in this territory might bring a rich ransom from their father or from the French.
This is Chief Chingachgook of the Mohican Nation. The brave who ran after Magua is his son, Uncas. We have a lot to talk about, but this is neither the time or the place.
Mike, ek het 'n nagmerrie gehad oor die toekoms gisterand.
Ja?
Ja, die lug, die kos, die reën, was als besoedel. Elkeen wat ek geken het was 'n mutant.
Klassieke post-apokaliptiese nagmerrie.
Die natuur daar buite kan wag.
Ons almal sal in mutante verander. Hallo liewe kykers, die naam is Ed Chicliac, u gasheer van Apocalypse Now. Dis 'n dokumentêre reeks oor die einde van die lewe en die wêreld soos ons dit ken.
From the red dirt of Oklahoma to the green grass of Yankee Stadium, Mickey Mantle was an American dream come to life. Today, teammates and fans bid him a final farewell. Vicki Mabry covered the Mick's last goodbye.
Today, Mickey Mantle filled the house a final time, drawing the big names in baseball.
The way he could run was shocking.
The politically powerful.
And my memories about Mickey Mantle are really my memories of when I was growing up.
And the boys of summers gone by.
Everybody wanted to be center fielder for the Yankees. Everybody wanted to be who he was.
Here to mourn the man who led them through childhood.
And in the last year, he's become my hero again.
We knew there was something poignant about Mickey Mantle before we knew what poignant meant. We didn't just root for him, we felt for him.
Today, there was talk of his courage in facing death, his honesty in facing his failings.
Yesterday, when I was young,
Mantle long ago chose the song he wanted to sum up his life.
And our last memories of Mickey Mantle are as heroic as the first.
For the children who watched Mantle growing up and growing old, this day marked the loss of both the person he became and the player he used to be. Vicki Mabry, CBS News, Dallas.
Before we leave, an update on Hurricane Felix. The eye of this especially wide-reaching storm is now about 300 miles off the Carolina coast, heading for a possible landfall sometime tomorrow in the Carolinas, but nobody really knows where it's likely to come ashore with what figure to be especially high water and some flooding. Stay with this CBS station for the latest on the hurricane. CBS This Morning will be all over it. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
time has come for me to pay for yesterday when I was young.
CBS News. Have you seen your country today?